Okay, I think we are ready to go. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, and or good evening to everybody, depending on where you are joining us from. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us, and thank you for being here for this session today. My name is Poliana Zorzal, and I am delighted to have you all here. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. And this is just one of the CDTS's monthly webinar events, when we invite experts to talk about health-related scientific topics that affect us all. CDTS, that's the acronym for Center for Technological Development in Health, is the unit at Fiocruz, Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, responsible for stimulating innovation in public health through the development of new tools, products or services, overcoming in this way the bottlenecks in the translational medicine pipeline. The involvement of stakeholders in the translation of scientific results to healthcare routine is one of our goals. And we do believe that we can only achieve those goals if we are working through partnerships. And this is the importance also of having you all here. So all the extramural researchers, the researchers from Fiocruz, policymakers, health workers, industry, and also patient organizations, all together with us working towards a public benefit. So we do believe that we can go further while working in alliance and getting as many as innovation as possible out to help our society. And as a result of it, strengthening our public health system. Just before I introduce our speaker, and the title of his talk, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics and details. All the participants must keep their audio shut down during the whole session, unless you have been given the floor for posing your own question. We invite and we encourage you all, your comments and questions to make this session as interactive as possible. Please use the chat box on the bottom of your screen. And if you think of a question or for our speaker at any point, just type it in there, either in Portuguese or in English, and I will either pose it at that time or at the end of our discussion. You can also use the raise hand button in the bottom of your screen. You can use it anytime, and if you want to just ask Dr. Dutchfield skills and ask a question in the middle of this talk, it's not a problem, as he guaranteed to me. So you can pose your questions in the middle of the talk. Also, as a general information, today's webinar is being recorded, and after the completion of our event, we will be able to share a link with you through our website, and the video is gonna be available on our YouTube channel. we welcome you to revisit also the content after our webinar, and also share it with your colleagues. So in today's webinar, we are gonna hear from Dr. Graham Dutchfield, who is gonna talk about COVID-19, intellectual property and technology transfer, legal and policy measures to enhance vaccine production and supply. Dr. Dutchfield is professor of international governance at the University of Leeds in the UK. And much of his research focuses on governance of technology, knowledge and intellectual property in the context of such major global challenges as public health innovation and access to medicines, food security, and biodiversity conservation, including benefit sharing. He has given lectures at various prestigious institutions, including University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, Harvard University, the World Bank, and now Fiocruz. So he's been quoted in The Economist, Newsweek, Nature, and the Wall Street Journal. His work has been recently cited in the final report of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on access to medicines. His latest books, published in 2020, are Dutchfield and Sodersman on global intellectual property, and That High Design of Purest Gold, a critical history of the pharmaceutical industry. In his talk, Professor Dutchfield will present some of his findings on access to COVID-19 vaccines and its intersections to the IP system. He's gonna give us an overview of compulsory licenses for patent technology, the proposed TRIPS waiver at the WTO, as well as their boundaries and limitations related to infrastructure, raw material, and manufacturing facilities. The topic has been intensely discussed worldwide by intellectual property specialists, but not just around people in the topic, but with around policymakers as well, researchers, and the press, especially since the TRIPS waiver first proposal at the WTO. However, the spotlight on the issue came when Biden trade advisor said that the US would support vaccines waiver, while stressing that they believe strongly in intellectual property protections. If the controversy around the issue wasn't enough, in Brazil, the misconception around the topic go further. Either alternative compulsory licenses or IP waiver are referred by the press and general public as quebra de patentes, which means break patents in English. As such, at least in this country, compulsory licensing and the TRIPS waiver are always going to be seen by general public as an infringement of to the IP rights, without considering even that these tools are allowed and predicted by the TRIPS agreement and also the Brazilian patent law. So to make this more interactive and also to hear from you about your opinion, because this is really a controversial issue. So before kicking off our seminar, we would like to know your opinion around this highly controversial issue. Then please take 20 minutes to make your selection to the question in the poll, which I am gonna launch soon. So how to scale up COVID vaccines production and distribution in your own opinion. And I just would like to tell you that you can be relaxed, because at least for us here today, there is no right answer. So let's see if this is gonna work. Is it there for you all? I guess it's working, isn't it? Take your time. As I told you, there is no right answer. Well, some more of us, now we have more numbers here. The numbers are going up. So just 5 seconds more, and let's end the poll, and I'm gonna show you the results. I think now you can see the results there. So we can see that we have quite divergent opinions here as well as everywhere. But we have bigger numbers and hope in Dr. Dutchfield's lecture. So let's wait and see if we can make our minds after his talk. So at this time, I'm just closing it here. So at this time, I'm gonna hand the floor over to you, Dr. Dutchfield, to start today's presentation. And once again, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here with us today. CDTS and surely the whole field crews are honored with your presence with us. So without further delay, it's all yours, Dr. Dutchfield.
Muito obrigado, Poliana, por me convidar para falar com vocês. É uma grande honra falar em uma instituição de pesquisa biomédica de tal prestígio. Na minha juventude, passei vários meses viajando pelo Brasil, mas isso foi há muito tempo atrás, quase 40 anos. Então, com desculpas, agora devo falar inglês. So, on to the English, where I'm a bit more comfortable. Okay. Right, okay, let me share the screen, but as I do it, I just want to say that if you open your mouth and say something about this subject, you are controversial. So nobody is going to, not everybody is going to agree with what I say, but I hope it will at least provoke thought. And so let's see what happens here. Let's see if there's a vote at the end. Let's see if it is any difference or not, or maybe they go the other way now, even further. We'll see. Okay, so let me share the screen, and I hope you can all see this slideshow. Okay, so this is the topic. I'll cover as much as I can in a time. I have an unusual perspective because my background is actually not law but geography, but for some strange reason I'm a law professor, and I won't go into the explanations for how that could possibly happen. All right, so I came up, when I was thinking about what to say, I came up with 4 what I call fundamental principles to go by in a global pandemic situation, which is what we are obviously in. But principle 1 is every person's life counts. Well, I think that applies in all situations every day. But I think it's in terms of policy making, we must always have that as our #1 principle. Second is that every day counts. Yeah, a necessary decision made tomorrow that could have been made today means more lives lost, more diminished livelihoods, more economic devastation, reduced delivery of other health interventions, especially for the poor, and increased possibility of more infective variants. And that anybody who knows anything about population genetics will know that's an obvious thing to say, that bit at the end. Principle 3, international cooperation is essential and must be based on sharing, here's where I get controversial, on sharing of medical technologies and the means to produce and supply them, and done in a way that is done actually universally and equitably. And principle 4, it is reasonable, if not necessary, to restrain artificial scarcities arising from nationalist policies or from private rights or the business models that jeopardize activities embodying these principles. So it's reasonable, if not necessary, to restrain artificial scarcities caused by either nationalism or IP or the ways of doing business. And I'll explain those in a moment, the last one. And I would say, just to be extra controversial, the onus should be on those countering restraints to justify themselves rather than us arguing in favor. Business as usual arguments tend to be unconvincing. I'm not saying they have no merit, but a lot of the ones I hear, particularly from industry, seem to be rather self-serving, and I don't find entirely believable. Okay, so let's go to the basics about this industry first. How does it make its money? What about first are its motivations? Well, of course, like any other industry, it's about profit, about making money. And under the sort of shareholder value sort of approach, the idea is that you are there to make money for your shareholders. And what means do they employ to do that? Well, they spend money on research, on discovery, testing, optimization, manufacturing of new products, and outsourcing and in-licensing of products and research of others. So new products, then marketing and pricing strategy to generate the profits from those new products, but also expanding the use of approved old products by seeking, for example, to add new indications. So it's also extending the income stream from old products as well as generating new ones. And as it gets harder to come up with radically new products, there is increased pressure to generate as much income from existing products. And so how do the industries respond to these sorts of pressures? Well, there are a number of things. I'll just highlight a few things. And this is quite well documented, in fact, quite well documented. There's a tendency to focus on what you might call variations on a theme, often rather unambitious, but still potentially lucrative innovation. Second, treatments for reducing risk of future ill health, risk factors, non-communicable chronic and other non-lethal conditions, which require a sort of continuous consumption, such as my high blood pressure pills, for example, and rather than for cures that entail temporary consumption. And then there are medicines that maximize revenues in rich country markets without regard to ability to pay in other markets. And then concentrating on those products most susceptible to strategic use of regulatory and property-related market exclusivities. And of course, we talk a lot about patents, but exclusivities are not just patents. There are various other exclusivities as well. Data-related exclusivities. Trademarks can form a kind of exclusivity as well. And then, of course, you have certain regulatory programs, such as orphan drugs, which also create exclusivities. And then I need to turn to life cycle management practices using IP and other exclusivities to extend effective monopolies, to shift patients onto new patented and branded products that may only provide marginal therapeutic benefits while taking often the old medicine out of production. And that's sometimes called line extensions or product hopping. And that, of course, is itself quite sort of controversial. All right. So let me just say something just provocative here and say little, if any, of these practices align well with our four principles. I'm in a way, as we say in English, I'm sort of sticking my neck out here and being provocative on purpose, because there may be some reasons to say, well, actually, you know, one could be a bit more nuanced, more balanced. But I'm just saying this just to get some kind of reaction, all right? But I do think there's quite a lot of truth in this statement. Okay, so when it comes to COVID vaccines, this is quite interesting here. We find that actually a lot of money that has gone into the research and development, including the mitigation of commercial risk. Also, without seeing the licenses, the contracts, it would appear also some reduction of liability in case these products do turn out to be to harm some people. Government, in other words, us taxpayers, have put in an awful lot of money. According to one preprint study, well over 90% of the funding towards the now we call the AstraZeneca vaccine, of which I've had 2 shots very gratefully, is paid not by industry itself, but by you know, taxpayers. So the point here, in a way, is that patents are really justified on the basis that the risk and the investment is done by industry. And so, you know, the bargain is we give them exclusive rights as a reward for disclosing their technology and for hopefully putting it into production and benefiting us, you know, with their products. But when the public is funding so much this way, it does call into question whether we need to have the same kind of respect for the legal monopolies that we normally would have for products where the whole of the innovation has been done by industry, which actually is less common than they sometimes tell us. Okay, now the situation with patents, of course, and COVID vaccines is rather unclear. And this is obviously true because of the fact that patent applications aren't usually published until after 18 months after filing. So we really don't know exactly what, but we do know that those companies that have put in applications and those companies that feel pretty confident their patent would be granted, just with that knowledge, will have, I would suggest, more of a bargaining position when it comes to licensing than if you don't have those patent applications in process. So this is one study by Gavri and Kilic, where they're looking at messenger RNA, and this is published in Nature Biotechnology quite recently. And you can see there's quite a lot going on in the area of patents. And so this is an early study, but I think it's quite interesting. So there's going to be a massive global patent complex out there in the coming years, right? And that kind of matters. When I say in the coming year, it matters because, of course, it's taking quite a long time for the vaccines to be produced and actually distributed to all the people in the world who need them. It's going to take quite a bit longer. And it's likely we're going to need booster shots. And with the variants caused by the spread, the widespread of COVID, the virus, obviously that spread, it makes it there's more likely to be variants which have a selective advantage because they're going to be more infectious. Right now we have the B1617 variant in the UK, which is actually taking over the population of viruses quite fast, right? Apparently the present vaccines work for this variant, but we can't be sure they will in the future. So we may need not just to tweak those vaccines, we may, for all I know, need actually completely, really quite new vaccines. So that's something sort of down the road, but we need to be aware of now. Remembering, as I often keep saying, is that this is a pandemic. We've had them before, and there will be others. And I think we must always bear in mind this. This is the next one could be worse. I hope not. All right. So technology transfer is a term that is very much used in relation to this, as well as in relation to a number of other areas, including environmental treaties. But the technology transfer sort of debate goes back to the 1960s, early 60s. I think Brazil was very much involved in the discussion in those days, United Nations. And in fact, UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, which was established in the United 60s, one of its main areas of interest was actually technology transfer. And in those days, it was rather a narrow sort of debate because it seemed to focus almost entirely on patents. And now we know that the debate has got much more interesting, much more sophisticated, and technology transfer is seen as being a much broader thing. And it's not even just about IP, it's about capacity to absorb technologies. And of course, since then, we've had the phenomenon of the Asian tigers, South Korean, Taiwan, etc., which have managed to become very advanced in technology in a very short time. Of course, you had Brazil with the small jets, jet planes is something that Brazil is very strong in, and one must ask the question of whether, if the TRIPS agreement had been there in those times in past decades, would these countries have been able to do what they actually did do? Would TRIPS have been an obstacle? I have a feeling TRIPS might have been an obstacle, but we can't turn the clock back to prove this. Okay, I'm not going to go. I'm just not going to read this, but just to show technology transfer has spread out in international law, and it is, I would say, if I may also be a bit controversial, to say it's the promise that the global north hasn't really kept, even though it is all over international law. It's all over the place, right? Well, actually, Montreal Protocol was actually reasonably successful, and IP in this particular case was allegedly not that much of a problem, but I don't think that's the truth in other fields. All right, so then you have, of course, the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, which is where I first got interested in all this stuff. Again, Rio Declaration refers to technological knowledge, diffusion and transfer technologies, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and Climate Change Convention as well. So we all know that it's really important. And the fact that we have these legal instruments which provides provisions for tech transfer isn't acknowledging, yeah, we all know it's important, right? But then what do we do about it? Well, for me, it's not rocket science, but it does require a certain amount of commitment, and those commitments haven't always been present. Okay, and of course you have the TRIPS agreement. Now, if you look at the World Trade Organization agreement, the agreement establishing the WTO, and you look at the TRIPS agreement, ADPIC, if your language is Portuguese, ADPIC, yeah. It is very clear that it seeks to strike this kind of balance. So in the preamble, the opening part of TRIPS, it makes reference to developmental and technological objectives. IP is meant to be about growth. It's not meant to be just about stopping counterfeiting. It's not just about stopping it's copyright infringement. It's actually meant to be about economic growth. And of course, technology is very important. And it's in the objectives, Article 7, which refers to the transfer and dissemination of technology to the mutual advantage of producers and users of technological knowledge. Now, the argument you get from Europe and from North America is to say, well, IP provides that balance. We don't have to do anything. IP provides that balance. So let's just, implement TRIPS and all these things will happen. Well, I can tell you, and I've done some technical support work in various African countries and others. And yes, there's still this hope that we implement TRIPS and we get all these technologies, but in many cases, the technologies are not coming. And the technologies are not coming because the market is too small, not enough wealthy people to actually, who form the customer base of those products, except, of course, mobile technology. Mobile phones are actually global. And I have to say, IP has not got in the way of everybody in the world having a mobile phone. All right. Okay. Okay. So, and then the principles, again, there's reference to economic and technological development, and so on. And there's also 8.2, there's reference to abuse of IP rights, abuse of rights. Okay, how do you define abuse of rights? Well, the fact it's there, abuse of rights happens. Does IP law itself deal with abuse, or do you go outside areas like competition law or others? But the fact of abuse in IP law being acknowledged, I think, is important. So it's not just like we create these rights and all these good things will happen. We know bad things will happen. Even, the US and Europe admit that bad things sometimes happen. Okay. Maybe the technology is not being transferred. Okay, now here's my little place in my tiny, teeny, miniature little place. I mean, history. In 2007, I got an email from somebody at the World Bank, and I'm not going to say, of course, I can't. It's wrong to give the name, and this was. I was written to out. I didn't expect this email, and I was asked by this person because at the time. Indonesia was refusing to pass on viral samples. Okay. This was an avian flu. Refused, and because Indonesia felt that the open access system, the World Health Organization, wasn't really beneficial for developing countries, because what would happen was that companies would have free access to these viral samples. They would then develop vaccines. Those vaccines would be expensive and unavailable. And so they asked for demanding some sort of a repositioning of the WHO system so that there would be provisions for benefit sharing. And I was asked, well, are there arguments from the Biodiversity Convention to say that Indonesia must hand over these samples? And I said, well, no. And I said this, given that the industry makes almost all its money in the developed world, perhaps a condition for free access to viruses should be technology transfer, even if this reduces profit-making opportunities in developing country markets, so that they can produce vaccine in emergency situations. Arguably, this would create great incentives to collaborate and transfer samples. And how this technology is transferred and who should pay, etc., are matters that need to be discussed. So maybe the World Bank, working with the World Health Organization, could bring together people from industry, government, etc., discussed how to set up a new system based on the old one, but incorporating reciprocity and technology transfer. So I sort of said this, and I never heard from her again, by the way. And probably she deleted the email, and that was it. But and then 2011, though, 4 years later, the World Health Organization does adopt this framework, which is actually never discussed. It's never discussed in relation to COVID. I know it seems to be completely left outside discussion. And of course, the context is a bit different because it was meant to be some kind of way to do benefit sharing, following in the sense the sort of principles of the Biodiversity Convention, I think. But it makes very, very clear reference as a principle to making efforts to transfer technology, skills, knowledge, and know-how to countries, particularly developing countries that don't have access, and recognize the need for finance that promote affordability and equitable access to quality influenza vaccines, medicines, and technologies by developing countries. And of course, in this case, Indonesia did have their bargaining position was their refusal to hand over samples. So they had something to sort of bargain with, and Indonesia was quite important at that time with that particular viral infection, because a lot of people in Indonesia were affected, and so there would have been variants that weren't shared in other countries, but would have come soon enough with international transport. And then, and it goes on that some, this is, you might say, an anti-vaccine nationalist before the term was devised, that manufacturers should set aside a proportion of vaccines for stockpiling by developing countries. And then they should, of course, be continuing to collaborate together and so on. And then technology transfer comes here as well. So here you have a bargain. This is benefit sharing. You get a benefit because you give something and you get something in return. It's a reciprocity. The trouble is with the COVID situation is that there's no reciprocity because there's nothing to sort of give back except, I guess, money, and countries are often short of money. So that's the difficulty. So it's a different context. Nonetheless, you start to talk about know-how, information, and knowledge, and sharing and technology transfer. Well, it's in one WHO instrument, so I don't think we should shy away from, if we do go down the road towards a pandemic treaty, a lot of this language I think could quite easily be put into that treaty. But I'm not going to go on about the treaty now, but I'll just leave it there. But actually, in terms of volunteer sharing, is it actually working? So I should have added actually Tam Bassetti and 4 other authors, but I'll come back to that article later, right at the end. There is a voluntary technology access pool that was started up thanks to Costa Rica. It was their initiative, but actually there hasn't been much cooperation. Right? So far, sort of voluntary sharing hasn't really been done, although there is a facility to enable it. And perhaps the issue here might be the industry doesn't want to share with the whole world. They want to share only with licensees. But what we want them to do is to have more licensees and to have fair terms, particularly because of the fact that many countries cannot make these vaccines and never will be able to in the short term, so they would need to import them. And licenses can be fairly exclusive. I wonder if Fiocruz is allowed to export AstraZeneca vaccines to other countries in South America, and how much. I would like to know, but maybe I'm not going to get an answer because of the confidentiality of licensing agreements. I see Pollyanna's head is nodding there. All right, okay, I shan't put any pressure. Okay, so the industry view put forward by Thomas Quenney of the IFPMA says at a time when the focus should be on science and innovation, undoing the very system that supports it is dangerous and counterintuitive. Okay, well, that's what he would say. That's his job, of course. But the system, as I've tried to sort of argue, the system, which is, it's a regulatory system, but it is also one where the industry has quite a lot of freedom to pursue exclusivity-based business model. If that is a system, well, I would argue that, is that the best that we can have? I don't really think so. Okay, of course, his argument is very powerful and has been largely accepted by many countries, particularly in the global north, but not only, but particularly in the global north. So Richard Gold, a Canadian academic, says the assumption that IPRs generally, and patent rights in particular, are crucial, if not absolutely necessary to foster innovation, is deeply ingrained in government policy making and in the courts as well. Now, innovation is an interesting word. It's a very interesting word, and I rarely get annoyed or irritated, but I do get irritated by the careless use of the word innovation. And I would like to sort of try and sort of discipline that word so we all agree what it actually does and doesn't mean. And this, I think the true meaning of innovation was understood a very, very long time ago, and we sort of deviated from it because it's now starts the sort of part of business talk in a way that is a bit propagandist, I would say. So, well, I'm English, so where am I going to go for sort of linguistic authority? The Oxford English Dictionary. But the Austrian economist Schumpeter, 1939, said innovation is possible without anything we should identify as invention. And invention does not necessarily induce innovation. Right? So patents are not a measure of innovation. Right? And even if you try to make them a measure of innovation, the problem is that to get a patent, your invention just has to pass the 3 requirements. It doesn't say anything about quality beyond that. There are high quality patents, there are low quality patents. I mean, I have a low quality patent here. I would say low quality patent. Here I have a patent, a document, a US patent on a reclosable container lid with sliding element. And here it is. It is a coffee lid with an open and closed sliding element. Oh, there we are. You see it? It closes. There we are. Quite clever. It's not going to change the world. We already had coffee lids. In fact, I have quite a few of my own coffee lids, so I've loads of these things. I collect them not because I'm a poor, sad man, because I use it for teaching patent law. Okay. That's my excuse. Okay, Jukes, 1958, he says, it seems impossible to establish scientifically any final conclusion concerning the relationship between monopoly and innovation. Nice and provocative, right? Now you might say, well, that was 1958. That's a long time ago. And I would say, actually, a lot of economic studies are fine-tuning what we already know. If that isn't too annoying to any economists who are listening to me now, but a lot of it really is. And then Alan in the 1960s, let's get a little closer to the present day. Innovation is a bringing of an invention into widespread practice, practical use. Invention may thus be construed as the first stage of the much more extensive and complex total process of innovation. Right, so if 30% of British adults have had the AstraZeneca vaccine, I would say, is that an innovation? Well, of course it is. It's quite impressive. But I'll be much more impressed by the innovation of vaccinating the whole world. Now that would be awesome. That would be incredible, right? So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm fussy. I'm not impressed by that enough. I want to see more, right? are not satisfied. Okay, now if we're going to delve a little bit into economics, there has been a certain amount of discussion. It comes out of an article published in the 80s about complex and discrete technologies. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the argument was, why is it that certain industries actually find the patents very useful in markets and others don't? And they're saying that things like chemicals and pharmaceuticals, they really value patents because of the fact that a molecule is a very easy thing to define and put a border around, whereas complex technologies are much harder to create borders around because they have so many different parts, interacting sort of parts. Okay. Now, where am I going with this? All right. So, you know, maybe a sort of classic discrete technology is aspirin. It's ASA is a chemical, and it's that, and it's nothing but that. Okay, so as long as you don't copy ASA, you wouldn't be infringing a patent. Okay, so the patent's expired 110 years ago now, but this is just an example. Okay, and on the left you have a mobile phone, which is definitely a complex technology, and of course there are so many rights around a mobile phone. Okay, so far it sounds like, well, medicines are discrete technologies, and this is not really a problem for patents. So these complex technologies, large numbers of parts, source elements from diverse places, large numbers of patent elements, other IP rights, ownership may be diverse, and easy to infringe rights inadvertently. And IP rights are used strategically, including for bargaining. Okay, so this is a complex technology. And so the old idea was that medicines were not like this. But actually nowadays they are. And there are two reasons why they are. One reason is that they're not really, but companies have used IP to make the IP surrounding these products as if they are complex technologies. Now, how do I explain that? What I'm saying here is that, let's say a medicine, you can now surround your patent, your first patent, with lots of other patents. So, for example, Humira, which is the world's best-selling, all-time best-selling drug. According to one study, they have so many patents around that product that the monopoly is actually, so far in the US, 39 years long and counting. And 90% of those patents were granted after the drug was originally approved. So now, you know, relatively discrete pharma technologies, the patent law is able now to treat them as if they are complex. And of course, vaccines actually are complex. They really are complex. And so, of course, you can see these lists of the ingredients of the AstraZeneca, the messenger RNA vaccines, and there are lots of ingredients that do have to be sourced from different places. And that also means, and I'm going to talk shortly about the compulsory licensing. This does have implications for compulsory licensing, and I'm going to explain why I think compulsory licensing isn't the first solution or the best or the first solution, but why an IP waiver would actually be a better thing. Okay, all right. Now, as a historian, if I dare call myself that, and if there are no historians here, I can say that. If there are historians here, I have to say a little more cautiously. But history is very helpful sometimes. No? So when the head of PHRMA says the Biden administration has taken an unprecedented step, as this has never been done before, that we are approving a proposal that at least vaccine IP should be waived. This will undermine our global response to the pandemic and compromise safety. Ooh, well, okay, that's a strong claim. And this will sow confusion, weaken supply chains, and foster the proliferation of counterfeit medicine. Well, I can tell you what that argument itself is quite historic, because this is the sort of thing they've been hearing since the Uruguay round. Okay. but without precedent. Well, let's have a look at a bit of history to see whether he is right that this kind of thing has never been done before. Well, history is relevant, I think, anyway, because it's, to understand something in the here and now, you need to know how we got here. I also think historians are very good at predicting the future, better than futurists, I think, dare I say it. History shows what many supposedly unprecedented events are actually repeat events, or they are, similar to things that happened before. Of course, you can use history for also for propaganda purposes as well, so it has to be a little bit careful here. But compulsory licensing. Who used to do this the most? It was Canada, United States. Canada and the US just had no qualms, no problems, particularly Canada licenses. In a period of 23 years, Canada 630 licenses for the manufacture or importation of medicines. Now Canada is against the IP waiver. Okay. United States has also done a lot to correct market failures for antitrust purposes or others. So it is an integral part of the patent balance and always has been. You go back to the English statute of monopolies of the 17th century. I mean, pretty much it goes back a long time. The idea that sometimes it's not in the public interest for a patent right to be used by monopolists, and therefore we can ignore the patent, or the government can say, well, we'll make it, or we'll let someone else make it. It is integral to the patent system. It's just as integral to the patent system as novelty, inventive step. That's a bit provocative, I know, and controversial, but I'll say it's just as integral as every other part of IP. And look at the European laws, the US and Canada. It's all it's there. It is there already. Okay, so the idea that it is theft and is therefore wrong or anti-innovation is erroneous. Of course, breaking a patent is a misnomer. Because a patent is not broken, it is still in force. You can still sue unlicensed owners, and you have a right to have compensation. So you'll get a royalty, and the licensee would pay that royalty usually, and your patent remains in force to be asserted against anybody else, and you get paid. So it's your property right has not been taken away. Okay, but we must consider how useful it can be in the case of relatively complex technologies, which are unlikely to be covered by a single patent. You could have a whole lot of patents, and that's I think the sign from Gillich and Gavaria is that that's almost certainly going to happen. There will be quite a few patents, a lot of licensing. So getting a license for one patent is not going to unlock the door. So it may form part of the menu of available options, and it's certainly appropriate for simpler medical products, but a general IP waiver would, I would say, be ideal. But the question remains what to do about know-how. What incentives can be provided, or must we resort to coercion? Know-how, yes. I mean, you can't force somebody to reveal a secret very easily. Has it ever happened? Has it ever happened without torture in business? Well, I'm sure it has, but generally speaking, I think human rights are important here. But somehow we want them to disclose the know-how, if not to the whole world, at least to potential producers. It's really important. How do you do this? Okay, other historical precedent. Now, this wonderful set of adverts here. In the First World War, at the time, and this is true for America, US as well as UK, we were very dependent on Germany for medicines. They were the world leaders by a long way. And so it was a patriotic duty of every English company to go and try and copy German inventions. It was a war. Okay, we're not in a war now, but sort of metaphorically, it is like a war because people's lives are at stake around the world. Okay, so it's not a war literally, but in some ways you could say it is an emergency situation, tantamount to being a war. So here, and actually what we did was we took away all the German patents and trademarks. We took them away, as did the United States. And in fact, the US chemical industry benefited hugely from the First World War, because they're able to just, they own the aspirin trademark, and they just were able to copy lots of things. Okay, a great example is penicillin. It's a lovely example. Here's some of the photos I took myself. Penicillin in, of course, Oxford University, they started to do penicillin. They were not able to manufacture it to treat more than 1 or 2 people. In fact, on the right, these are actually biscuit tins, and the bottom on the middle is a bedpan, a hospital bedpan. So they were using biscuit tins and bedpans to manufacture penicillin. And I can tell you, you aren't going to make much this way. Right? So they basically, the 2 main scientists went to the United States, and they shared their knowledge, which was of course quite useful. And the United States went to work. Again, it was a war. Well, 20 companies were involved in penicillin manufacture. With government permission and exemption for antitrust legislation, they share technology, know-how with each other and with academic institutions. And the US government itself became the center of a network of sharing of expertise across, actually, well, it was actually 25 companies at one time. And this was hugely successful. So this was a sharing situation. They pooled their technology. So this was like the COVID, access to technology thing. But this was done just in the United States. And this was massively successful. They've learned how to mass produce, and they were able to sell it around the world for quite a low price. This is not entirely different from some manufacturing nationalism, because, of course, foreign companies in the UK and others had to pay license fees, not for patents, but for the know-how. They had to pay for the know-how, but the fact is, it became very cheap, and it was successful. Sharing is often the very best way. Now, what we're asking now is for the sharing to cross national boundaries, the sharing to become global. But it's hard to do this because governments say our first duty is for our citizens, not for the world. But we do need to, I think, globalize our mentality in lots of ways. Okay, so summing up, back to the fundamental principle, which I've already showed you before. Of course, imperatives here, we need urgently to reduce these bottlenecks, increase productivity, and globalize production. And ideally, every continent should have its own production hub for this pandemic and onwards to the next ones. How do we get there and fast? Well, it's not just a humanitarian issue. It is also in all our financial interests. So, I'm in favor of paying industry to disclose their know-how to developing country producers, and also to developed country ones as well. I think they should be given incentives rather than forced to hand over their know-how, because this know-how is probably going to involve people going and visiting production sites, advising on setting up supply and production chains. And there is this expertise which is absolutely indispensable. And if you force them to do it, you're not going to get it done very well. So somehow you do need to create the incentives. I personally believe that the IP waiver shifts the balance of power, which I hope is going to lower the taxpayer's price of making them do this, because we paid a lot of taxes already. And somehow, industry has to do its bit, not just in terms of producing, and of course, it's done very well by many criteria. But let me just say something about the financial interests. I just came across a study by the IMF. It's obviously not really peer reviewed as such, but I think it makes a very interesting sort of point. They estimate the cost of vaccinating 40% of population in all countries around the world, and then enhancing over the next year, and testing and tracing, etc., how much would that actually cost? About to $50 billion, they say. Okay, well, how much destruction and devastation is COVID causing the global economy? And of course, the rich countries lose a lot of money too. It's not just the own countries. From a global economy, the lack of the massive disruption is hitting the whole world. It is hitting the whole world. You can see, I mean, the UK when the economy went into negative rates for a while. Other countries are the same. So to do nothing is going to cost us $9 trillion. To do something will cost us $50 billion. I'm not a mathematical expert, but to say that here is some good business here. We just need to get everyone in the room and sort it out. But one thing, the caution is you must sort it out. You must leave the room and it's sorted. So bring together industry and government and say, we have a certain pot. We don't want to go up to 50 million as we really have to, but there is a pot. We want to keep that low. You want it to be high, but let's get in a room and let's sort this out. But the IP waiver, I think, is going to help because it is going to, it shifts the balance of power. I mean, we've paid so much money. Look at how much we have paid industry for this, how much risk we've taken away. We want something back. Yes, we got the vaccines, but we want a bit more than that. I think we should have a bit more. I think it is a humanitarian imperative, but it is also, I think, one which is in all of our interests. So I'm going to stop here, but leave you with a citation. The rest of that one, it wasn't just Tampasetti, but McMahon, McDonough, Kang, and some other guy. A new paper has just come out on how we justify the waiver proposal. Obviously, I've drawn a little bit on that paper as well, with a few of my own ideas too. Thank you for hearing me. I've been talking probably much too long, but I'll hand you all back to Pollyanna. Thank you.
Thank you. It was actually great listening to you, and I want to share my screen again, and we can start maybe our Q&A session. Yeah, I think it's working. So as I told you, thank you. It was really enlightening talk, and I am sure that your talk is food for thoughts in our audience and has populated their minds with questions. And as a reminder, if you have a question that you haven't yet submitted, please do so in the chat box, and we'll get through as many questions as time allows us. We also encourage you, if you want, it's really, it's gonna be good if you just raise your hand and using the button on the button in the bottom of your screen, and the floor is gonna be given to you. You can pose the question in Portuguese or English. And I think maybe, let me just stop this here. I think if we don't have any questions still, I have some, and I can start, but let me see if there are some of our participants, our audience, waiting for chat. So my chat is open. Yeah, so if I am gonna start and also pose some some things that I've been thinking about, because as I told you all at the beginning, I think this topic is really, really difficult to balance. Actually, it's clear that everybody needs the vaccine, and the waiver is quite the best option for everybody. But I also, I've been reading some papers and listen to some people around the topic, and I've been trying to get as much as information as possible to talk to you also here today. And after all the reading, I have to be fair with you. I have no answer still, but I found some stuff that I think it's interesting to try to discuss here, and do some of devil's advocate also here.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to a podcast another day with people from IP companies that they have really strong opinion about it. And they talked about this, what you just told us, that how to enforce trade secret disclosure to people. If you have the waiver, we know that for the vaccines, especially the mRNA vaccines, it's really a complicated. Vaccines in general are already complicated, but the mRNA are even more. So they were wondering about how to enforce and to oblige people and companies to disclosure their trade secrets and know-how. I don't know if you kind of talked already a bit about it. So, in your opinion, Professor Dutchfield, we should structure something in a way that the trade secrets and the know-how is going to be disclosure just for the producers, the supposed the licensed company, but the ones that are going to produce effectively it's just like I keep wondering how to put this on the ground, and just like some formalities.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's an important question to ask. Well, one thing is, of course, nowadays we used to talk about developed countries and developing countries. Well, actually, I have to say I disagree with that distinction. That I think every country is a developing country, including the United States, including the UK, because we're all on our way. I hope, to become somewhat better. So we're all developing. But when you look at the world, there is a massive sort of difference between one country and another. So, if you thought about, say, an elite developed country in Central Africa or Central African Republic or Burkina Faso, I don't think it is realistic to expect them to be producers of mRNA vaccines in the next few years. On the other hand, us in this part of the world can be rather patronizing as well. And so it was often assumed that during the HIV/AIDS crisis, we go back 20 years now, and of course, things could have been done much better at that time. And again, it was a situation where every day, when people don't have access to medicines, they're dying. and actually it's a pretty horrible death as well. So it was assumed, well, let's suppose these people have these drugs. Do they have a refrigerator? Are they, do they know what times of the day that they should take the pill? Maybe they don't have watches or clocks, and this kind of thing. And of course, when when you are living a very marginal existence, those people are pretty smart, because they need to be smart every day in order to survive. So one should not underestimate their capacities. So I would say in every continent there is a facility, at least one facility, if not several facilities, that could, with technical assistance, the sharing of know-how, could become local producers. You have to start somewhere. Look, it might take a while. It may take more than a year. It may take more than 2 years. It may take more than 3 years. But we have to start now, because there are lots of people saying that COVID is not going to go away. It's not going to suddenly disappear in the end of 2020. It's not going to go away. Meanwhile, the mRNA technology is an amazing technology that can be used for many other medical things. And I think transferring that technology would give some countries amazing opportunity. But I think we need to try this. And I don't believe there is not a continent where it can be done. I really don't believe that. I accept it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's not like a recipe for cooking an apple pie. I can read a celebrity chef's recipe and I could make an apple pie. It's probably not as good as the one that the celebrity chef makes, but it's okay, right? It's good enough. It's good enough. No one's going to die eating my apple pie. But obviously, it's a lot more complex than that. I went to Ghana 11 years ago to talk to small drug companies in Ghana that were trying to manufacture AIDS drugs. And I didn't know about the capacity. And they're small companies, they don't have much money. But these guys who ran these small companies, they all had PhDs from the University of the United States. They're all highly qualified people. What they lack is money and equipment and other things. But I don't believe they're not smart enough to do it, but it will take them some time. So let's get started now, they can do the booster jabs, they can do the variant jabs, we need to get manufacturing to be started now. And industry has an interest in say, oh, it's too complicated. And I can't prove they're wrong. But I do know that they have a commercial interest in saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if we start now, maybe for the next pandemic, we are going to be a little bit better than we are right
I hope
now.
So.
And with all this impact in our lives and so on. So if you have some facilities already able to produce some of those vaccines in other countries, is going to be really, really helpful. And I see that Marcus Freire is with his hand raised. So I will handle the word for you, Marcus. You can ask or make your comments.
No, I just want to thank you, Dr. Dutfield, for the webinar, the talk. His talk was fantastic, and one point that he talked about is very important to comment and ask him, is because I don't think that to disclose the patents will solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because for biological, it's not simple like that. I have been in my life involved in many discussions with big pharma. I remember the time that one CEO from one big farm said, my business is sell vaccines, is not sell technology. And one thing that people talk about patent, but they don't talk about is about the raw materials. Let's say to produce a vaccine like AstraZeneca, you should have the cells, you should have the virus, and you should have the process established. And more than that, you should have the clinical dates. And in my opinion, patent is important sometime, but you will not put manufacturer able to produce a vaccine, because they will need more time to develop their process, their virus, and the cells and everything, and the machine too. Because if you talk about the bioreactors, and if you talk about the South America or African countries or even Asian countries, who will make the bioreactors? Who will make the process? Who will certify the cells? Who will prepare and certify the cells? Who will prepare and certify the virus? And my question to you is, if you really think that the patent will make it, let's say, do a job that will, let's say, disclose the information that will be sufficient for the manufacturer to produce. And another question for you is more short, is when you talk about the pandemic, I was in many meetings in PAHO and the WHO and the others to discuss preparedness for pandemic, flu pandemic. And I remember the meeting in Cuba, I remember the meeting in Washington, D.C. and Geneva, and to discuss that. And more closely, we had a SAPI, that the idea for SAPI was to, let's say, to know who will be able to manufacture, who will be able to absorb the technology if they will really want to transfer. And what you see today is not like that. What you see is they don't want to transfer. It's not easy to transfer. But if they want to do, who will be able to produce and use their equipment and their facilities? It's just that. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Dutfield. I just want to tell you, because I haven't said before, Dr. Marcos Freire is our general sub-coordinator at the CTTS, and he worked for 35 years in our Biomanguinhos, which is the unit at Fiocruz, which is responsible for the production of our vaccines, including the AstraZeneca Oxford one. And also he was deputy director there for technological development. Just to contextualize, because I forgot it before.
Thank you. Well, you're Marcos, you're a true expert. You're actually doing it. Okay, first, I mean, I'm not disagreeing at all with you about patents, because that's why I'm skeptical about compulsory licensing, that these are sort of complex technologies, and even if you had a patent that you didn't have to respect and you could still read it and it was useful, that's one piece of the information that you need, and there's so much else. And of course, patents are of course disclosures, but companies only want to disclose enough in writing, make public, that they have to do to get their legal rights, but they don't want to go beyond that. So yes, there is a lot else. So when I say I support the IP waiver, I don't mean the patent waiver. I mean an IP waiver because I don't think actually that the patents in themselves are with complex technologies, an individual patent composite license isn't going to do much in itself. It's not going to be that helpful. And I know sort of biology is complicated, because I sometimes ask the question, which I really shouldn't ask, but biology maybe isn't a science in the way that, that physics or chemistry is a science, because biology is still very empirical, isn't it? I mean, I was involved in a metabolic engineering project in Canada, and I was the non-scientist advisor, the legal guy, and I asked this guy, do you know what's going to happen when you put a bit of DNA into a microbe? He said, no. I mean, in theory, it's going to work beautifully, but actually it's empirical. We really don't know. So, yeah, I mean, so obviously, Fiocruz is a top institution where, and you're going through the experience of that technology transfer is actually happening in your case, and you can say how difficult it all really is. Yeah, and the ability to absorb technology is, of course, really important, and that's why the discussion on technology transfer is in a way much more interesting than it was 50 or years ago, when it's all about patents. And now it is about absorptive capacity, the capacity to absorb, which is actually about things like education, etc., education, financial resources, equipment, and all that as well. So I know it's difficult. Yeah. So thanks. I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Yeah, and just something also related to what you both talked. When we talk about biology, biotechnology, and all the technology developed around this subject, we talk about always unpredictability.
Yeah.
So always we have this problem, because it's not like math or physics that you just
no.
Predictable what is the result that you are gonna have. And for these, and also around these that Marcos just told us, is that I think that by now for the technologies that we are talking about, those vaccines, the biggest part of what's important for this technology transfer is the know-how and the trade secrets, especially because when you consider it, you are not talking about just a specific vaccine. You are talking about a platform that can be used to many other vaccines in the future. So, so it's really not just about patents. I also heard analogy with an iceberg. So patents are just the top side, what we can see, but what is huge is underwater. So I just continuing, I see that Mark has his hand raised. So if you can, go ahead, Mark, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
perfectly.
Thank you, muito obrigado. Thank you, Poliana. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Professor Dudfield. Good to see you again. And of course, I had to comment on this talk of yours, especially on the paper that you have discussed upon. And I would encourage everyone to read Graham's paper, and it's also nice to see that his co-author Luke is here as well. Now, coming to my question, in the paper, it is nicely described that there was some willingness of companies in, for instance, Israel, like Teva, and another company in Bangladesh, I think it was, approaching the current producers as to their capacities in doing so. So I was just wondering, and of course, some of them they rejected, some were not answered, as much as I understand. Could the reason also be that the companies, the young mRNA companies, they are quite small companies. They used to be quite small. They're kind of like hyping up that they're just a bit like overwhelmed with what they have to do now. I feel that might be an issue in the whole debate. So I'm just wondering whether you know why possibly they have been these calls from other manufacturers in the third world or other countries have been rejected? Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Mimler, for your question.
You're welcome,
yeah,
Professor.
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't really have any inside information, really. I mean, these companies presume that they think that they would be able to do it with necessary technology transfer. Yeah, the fact that they think they can do it doesn't mean they can, of course, but we have to see. Yeah, sorry, what was, could you just add a little to your question, a little more detail, what you actually, I sort of, it's been a long day, and there's, for us in this part of the world, right? So, yeah, could you just... I
know, I'm the same time zone.
Yeah.
No, whether you would, what do you think is your guess? Why is it just like they're not willing to? Because you were you were saying like, oh, it's their business model to not to license out. At least I think that's what I understood. Whereas you could argue, of course, if by licensing out to companies, they would actually make more money.
Well, yeah, perhaps maybe they would. Well, I need to get a research project, Mark, and do some empirical research and go and ask questions. Right? I don't know for sure. It's like when if a company writes to another company and they get no answer. What does that really mean? Does it mean they're not interested? Does it mean they didn't get the message? Lost in the post? When I was in Ghana, the government, they were asking whether they could give a company in Ghana a license to make a drug. And they write to the company and said, do you mind if do you object if we do this? Sometimes they got no answer. Oh, okay. So they'll sort of wait a while. And they said, well, we had no objections, so let's just do it. So that's, see what happens. Yeah, so I don't know for sure, really. Yeah.
If you allow me, if you allow me, I'll just jump in here. And I have just an opinion also about it, because I heard also this same podcast from IP lawyers and representatives of companies, and they were discussing about these possibilities of licensing to other companies around the world. And they were saying exactly like that, if you are gonna license to those companies, to those small companies, and you have to teach them, and if you have to build new facilities, if you have to do the whole job before getting the vaccines done there, much better is spend your time in your own facilities producing your own vaccines without licensing, without spending your time with other companies. And so maybe this is the kind of thought in this situation, that as Professor Dutchfield told us, there are so many facilities that aren't able to reach the requirements and to meet what the licensor is requesting. But what I do think in this situation is more that let's keep to us, and because otherwise we are gonna lose money and time teaching them and spreading what just us we have. And so if you wanna say something also, because I just interrupt you again. Okay. So I think there is also Elsa de Castro. She's with her hand raised. So Elsa, if you want, if you wish, you can say your question or comment. Are you there? I can't hear you. I think you are on mute. No, you are on. Let's see right now. Perfect. Now it's working.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate Fiocruz for this initiative, and especially for the choice of the speaker. I am a very old fan of Professor Graham Dudfield. I had the privilege to work with him many years ago, especially on other subjects too, as traditional knowledge, biodiversity, and of course on trips and public health. So we have met in Brazil, in Geneva, long time ago. But of course, with the work that Professor Graham Dudfield has been doing all his career, all his life, I think that it couldn't be better and more opportune to invite him to address our audience about such an important subject. Well, I could not hear the beginning of the presentation because I had a problem with my the internet. I'm currently in a friend's house, so I am not very much, I would say, very much familiar with all the computer and things here in the house. But anyway, what I have heard also, as usual, also impressed me a lot, and I pay a big tribute and respect to Professor. By the way, I want to show him my last acquisition, his book.
Oh my God.
Here it is. So I'm starting to read it.
Yeah, one reader now, yeah.
It will take a little bit some time to read and really to reflect a little bit more, but I'm sure this will be a wonderful reading that will add a lot to my experience. Well, I'm going to make a remark about your presentation.
Okay.
I don't know if you mentioned one aspect that I would like to raise. It's more like a curiosity, but perhaps you could say something for me.
Okay.
In the previous pandemic, we didn't have the problem of the influence of the media. At this time with COVID-19, I think that many measures that could have been taken by governments and also by society were, in my point of view, delayed because we confronted a battle between point of views that were sometimes just based on ideology and political views and science, a big battle between science and between fake information. So I would like that you could tell me what is your view, to what extent fake news, including in countries where people were supposed to be more educated, to what extent it prevented the society and governments to address the pandemic in due time and taking the right measures to prevent the pandemic from spreading and to look for solutions for example, the treatment, ways to educate people to how to confront the situation. So I think that it was a mess and a mix of different messages that the media conveyed. And I think that it's, to a certain extent, impaired the whole process to start and flow according to our true needs. So if you could give us some your insights about this, I would appreciate, because this is almost something that really hurt. Is to, when we are confronted with fake news and people are following opinions that have no ground. So that's my question, Professor.
Thank you. Well, okay, let me sort of split that into two parts. The first part is maybe not quite so relevant, but I still want to say it, is that we haven't had these other sort of flu epidemics in the last few decades, The last one was, I think in Asian countries. Now, it's often said that the UK and United States were the best prepared countries for a pandemic. And yet we have one of the highest numbers of deaths per head of population in the whole world. And one thing is, and I don't want to talk too much about politicians, but we were very complacent. We were a bit too overconfident. We thought, well, we are, we're the best and we can handle this, and we couldn't. So it's been a very humbling experience. The Asians were exceptionally good. A number of countries, did incredibly well, and they dealt with it very, very efficiently. And we were not efficient at all, even though scientifically we're very strong. We had the UK has done the most sequencing of the variations, sequencing of the viral genomes. It's been very effective that way. Very good scientists. But policy, it was disastrous. Now it's a lot better, but it was disastrous for quite a long time. Now, so the problem is not just about fake news. It's about complacency. It's about poor leadership. But when it comes to, of course, people thinking vaccines are dangerous. We mustn't take vaccines, which I find incredibly annoying. Because we've used vaccines for 2 centuries. Now we don't have smallpox, we don't have polio, or hardly have polio, which my mother had polio, and it affected her body for her whole life. And so it's that close. Now no one worries about polio. So of course, the social media thing, Facebook and everything, Twitter, fake news. It sells, it makes money, because it's the economy of attention. It's not the economy of truth, it is the economy of attention. And saying vaccines are safe isn't very interesting. Vaccines are dangerous, and here's why, it's false, but it's interesting. And therefore, that means you spend more seconds, more minutes on Facebook, and Facebook puts in an ad there. So the whole social media is a huge problem. Yeah, it's particularly bad, I think, in the United States. You wonder why, because the United States has the world's best universities, and yet there's immense ignorance actually in that country, which I find very hard to understand. I don't quite know how you sort of deal with this. So what's the solution is, yeah. We'll have to discuss this another time, Yeah, I wanted to be solved, but it's wanted to be solved. Me telling people to be sensible and not be idiots is it's not very easy. No, it's not. Unfortunately, falsehood sells. It sells. There's a market for falsehood. Yeah.
Sure. So Elsa, you wanna pose any other question? Okay. So anybody? So I think, yeah, because there is some comments. There are some comments here in the chat box that Luke told us about Mart's question, and he says maybe we can read it and discuss.
Okay, I'm reading this now about Teva. Yes, it might be they don't want to help Teva, because Teva was recently, it got into the top 20 in the world of drug companies, so it's very, very successful. And Teva is one of the companies that's on the margins. It's on the way to becoming one of the big boys, and it might be. Yeah, it would be nice to be a fly on the wall, in that discussion that would have taken place when they decided that we didn't want Teva. Yeah, but of course, in a way, it would be good to have had Teva because they have a good capacity. So you think, for us, it would be good, but for Moderna, having Teva maybe not in their interest for the reasons that you do suggest. So although I don't have any, I can't sort of say you're right or wrong. I mean, I don't know enough. But if you're right, and if actually Teva could have done this, that would again reinforce the point I made earlier, that the way the industry does its business, which in some ways goes back 140 years to the beginning of the industry, although it has changed a lot in the last few decades, is one that it's the whole incentive and reward structure is one that isn't fully in line with the kind of healthcare system, the commercial healthcare system that we would like to have. You know, it's not entirely wrong. It's not but it's certainly not entirely right. And it does need to be, the incentive structure does need to be reformed, which we can do because it is a highly regulated industry, and we can regulate it how we want. Okay, so we which is why we always have to think about making it better. We get the industry, the industry that our regulatory system deserves. So if we have a complaint about the industry, in a way, it's not the industry's fault. It's the fault of how we regulate the industry. And in a democratic society, we have a view on this. We are entitled to have a view on this, and we can have a say in how that regulatory system is reformed, so it lines up better with the kind of industry, the incentive structure of industry that we would like to have. That would be best for all of us. It's never going to be perfect, but we can do better, I think. You know, so for example, in the United States, you have a regulatory system that provides exclusivities. For example, orphan drugs, you know, drugs for rare diseases, for which they're few. And the industry is very good at sort of gaming the system, at getting sort of legal monopolies. They shouldn't, well, legal monopoly exclusivities, they shouldn't really be having. They basically split up the indications into very small indications in order to get orphan drug status for each of those indications. And that's not what was really intended when the Orphan Drugs Act was actually passed. So industry has a good way, clever ways of gaming the system. They do it in many different ways. And you could say, well, why shouldn't they? That's business. A regulatory system is one to obey, but at the same time, you're always trying to find ways to creatively get round it or to use it for your own interests that were not intended when the regulatory system was devised in the first place. Sorry, it's a bit long there, but.
Well,
yeah, no problem at all. It's been good. Is there someone that wants to pose a new question? Yeah, but so I just would like to say just another thing that also I found interesting. I don't know if my internet is helping. Is it okay? Can you hear me well?
I can hear you. Yeah, you froze for a few seconds, but.
Okay, so yeah, so I am gonna turn off my camera, and it's gonna be better.
Okay.
Just because also another analogy that I saw another day, and I think it's quite good when we see this and those kind of analogies, and you try to overcome the arguments and try to understand if that is really right or not, and if it's true or not, actually. So it was just an analogy about trade secrets again, and also, we were talking about how to enforce the disclosure of trade secrets, but what called my attention was that they were also saying that once you say you disclosure your trade secrets or your know-how, there is no way to establish the trade secret back. And we know because of its characteristics that this is the normal thing. And the person was saying that this is like a gin in the bottle. If you put the gin, if you ask the gin to go out, to get out, you can't put the gin back in. And this is interesting just to think also when we think about the waiver or any proposal, how to regulate it and how to organize it in a way that when the pandemic is over, how to stop people using a trade secret that is not anymore a secret. So I found this discussion interesting, and I know that it's not an easy answer, but I just would like to share it with you all.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can't unknow something that you've already been told. Yeah, but I think sort of know-how licensing is quite a standard thing, though. You know, you know-how licensing, non-disclosure agreements, and things. So I guess it is sort of standard. I suddenly remember an interesting story, which is a bit different, but in a way it's just quite interesting, about a country in the Pacific called Vanuatu, where you have songwriters, and these songwriters, they compose their own songs and they sell their songs for money. So they basically they sing their song to the person who buys the song, and so the person then is in possession of the song, and then the original composer goes into a trance and forgets the song. Well. Yeah, so that's an interesting kind of that was actually in an anthropological article that I read. So yeah, I guess this is not something that's going to happen. Once the secret is out, it can't be put back in the bottle. But I think trade secrecy, it's quite normal to have transactions in trade secrets. I mean, you must have this with sort of joint ventures or all sorts of so collaborations between companies across national boundaries that involve manufacturing. So I guess it is done. It's not really, So I guess that is the price of sharing your secret, but maybe that price is factored into the whole transaction, so that then, okay, you know, the secret is not going to be forgotten. It could be useful in producing something else, but yeah, we got paid. We are satisfied with the deal that we got. So I guess you need to really look at sort of contracts and licenses, but you'll probably find that know-how is not unusual to have a know-how license or license that involves secrets. So yeah. So I guess that's not insurmountable, let's say. Yeah.
And especially when we consider that it's worth the result that we are gonna get by the end if we have something in this way.
Yeah.
So I think I am done with my questions, at least by now, and I would like to know if someone has another question to pose to Dr. Dutfield. Otherwise, we are quite on time, and I am gonna just say a few words and we can close our session. I am gonna just share my screen here again. I would like, first of all, thank you, Dr. Dutfield, for not just for the enlightening presentation, but always your availability and for being so grounded and it's just amazing being here with you and learning from you. As Elsa told us, you have many fans around the world.
No, surely not. I can't believe it. No, surely not.
So I would like to wrap up the session and ask Dr. Marcus Freire to jump in and say a few words just to close our session. Dr. Marcus Freire, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Poliana. I just have a few words. I just have to thank Dr. Dutfield to be together today with us. I think this discussion is a big discussion that we will spend one day alone to discussing. We have no answer. It's difficult to predict what we will have in the future, but it was fantastic, in my opinion. We have, well, let's see. We have many questions that should be answered in short time, but others will take time to be answered. But it's true that this patent know-how and trade secrets is something that should be discussed better in the future, because today what we can say is that you have many manufacturers in the world that would help to produce vaccines, but today is more easy to see the CMOs to producing vaccines, and by contract between them and the manufacturers or developers. And I have to thank you, and I hope we'll have opportunity to be together and discuss this issue in other times and for a long time. Thank you a lot to be today with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and hopefully personally soon, let's see. And just to say also that you were saying that we have lots of questions. Yesterday I watched another lecture of Dr. Dutchfield, and they finished the lecture saying the same thing that we are saying right now. We agree in many things, but we need many answers still. And this is the way that we do it. We discuss and we try to find the better way to follow. And so again, big thank you, not just Dr. Dutchfield for being here with us, but for you all. It was a pleasure being your hostess and talking to you all. Thank you, Dr. Dutchfield, for sharing your insights and expertise with us. And it was a real honor, as I already told you.
Thank you so much.
And
thank you for inviting me. So yeah, thank you for inviting me so much. It's been a great experience. Thank you, and it's a real honor to be invited to speak to Fiocruz. It's an institution I respect a lot. So over to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. I am just turning off this again because here the internet's not helping. So just if you have any additional questions, or if you would like to connect directly with Dr. Dutchfield, you can either reach out directly using the contact information on this slide, or you can reach out via Twitter or LinkedIn. He's amazingly active on social media. So, and you can also follow CDTS news and events through our website and social media. Again, thank you all for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.